Saad was born under the pale light of a harvest moon, and even as a child, there was something about her that set her apart. She moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly, her eyes bright with curiosity and intelligence, taking in everything around her with quiet fascination. The villagers would often see her helping the elders, reading leaves and signs in the river, or tending to the animals with a gentleness that belied her youth. It was not just her kindness that drew attention, but the keen awareness that seemed to guide her actions. Saad could predict the behavior of others before they acted, notice small details overlooked by the keenest observers, and, most unnervingly for some, anticipate events in ways that seemed like foresight. Her stepmother, however, did not share the admiration that the villagers held for her. Malika was a woman consumed by envy, unable to bear that Saad, a girl she had married into the family, could command the affection and attention of the village so effortlessly. With her own children failing to shine in comparison, Malika's insecurities fermented into something more dangerous, a desire to suppress Saad entirely. Every compliment Saad received, every whispered story of her cleverness, stoked the fire of Malika's jealousy. The stepmother began subtly at first, criticizing Saad in front of others, questioning her worth and questioning her place in the family. But soon, quiet manipulation turned into overt cruelty, and Saad found herself increasingly isolated within the walls of her own home. Her brothers, who had once been mildly playful with her, were swept into Malika's orbit. They mimicked her mother's disdain, teasing Saad, undermining her efforts, and reporting to their mother any small misstep or moment of defiance. Their cruel laughter echoed in the compound, and though Saad felt pangs of sadness and betrayal, she never lost her resolve. She understood that cruelty often hid weakness and fear, and so she observed, carefully taking note of every glance, every hushed conversation, every small act of conspiracy. The day came when Malika decided to take her actions further. Claiming that Saada's cleverness was dangerous, that her influence over villagers threatened their family's position, and that her foresight was unnatural, Malika had her seized. Saad did not resist, but she looked around at the faces of those who had once smiled at her, now twisted with fear, envy, and loyalty to her oppressors. Chains, cold and heavy, were wrapped around her wrists and ankles. The iron bit into her skin, leaving red impressions that throbbed with every movement, yet Saad did not scream. Her mind, sharper than the blades of her restraints, focused on the small details, the way the lock clicked, the angle of the sun through the bars, the sounds of her stepmother's retreating steps. In the beginning, it felt as though the chains were not only physical but mental, constraining her thoughts, limiting her capacity for freedom. But Saad discovered something profound in those moments of confinement. Her mind could roam where her body could not. She recalled lessons from the village elders, the secret signs of the forest, and even small practical tricks she had learned from observing tools, locks, and mechanisms around the home. In her solitude, she began mapping the patterns of the compound, noting which windows and doors were left slightly ajar, which locks rusted and which were tight, which family members had predictable routines. Even in the darkness of her cell, Saad could hear the whispers of her family. She learned more about their fears than she ever had before, piecing together their intentions and weaknesses from every careless word spoken near the doorway. Malika would mutter under her breath about keeping the girl under control, while the brothers would quarrel about who should watch her or fetch the key. Every syllable became a thread in the tapestry of knowledge that Saad was weaving in her mind. Her resilience became a quiet rebellion. Each night, as the household slept and the moonlight slanted across the cold stone floor of her confinement, Saad closed her eyes and envisioned freedom. She imagined the chains breaking not as a fantasy of magic, but as a result of her cunning, her patience, and her ability to outthink those who thought her powerless. She revisited in her mind every lesson from her life: how to move silently, how to pick up on subtleties, how to anticipate actions before they were taken. The chains could hold her body, but they could never hold her mind. There were moments of fear, moments when the weight of captivity pressed on her like a storm cloud, but she welcomed these trials as tests of endurance. She practiced control over her own impulses, measuring her responses to provocations from Malika's taunts and her brother's jeers. In her solitude, she discovered an unexpected power, clarity. She began to see patterns in the household dynamics, the vulnerabilities in her oppressors' behaviors, and the opportunities for eventual liberation. Even as her physical strength was tested by the cold and the biting metal, her mental strength expanded. She found courage in observation, patience in endurance, and strategy in every whispered conversation that slipped through the cracks of her prison. Saad became an invisible force, understanding the depths of human nature, the weaknesses of her family, and the tools she could employ to regain control of her destiny. The chains, rather than breaking her, had forged a deeper awareness within her. By the end of the first season of her confinement, Sada's world had narrowed physically, but it had widened mentally. Every sound, every creak in the floorboards, every shift of her captors became part of a living map she carried in her mind. She knew she would not remain a prisoner forever. The chains might bind her hands, but they could not bind her knowledge, her intuition, or her growing sense of purpose. And in the quiet moments when no one was watching, Sada allowed herself to imagine the moment when she would finally find the key they thought was lost. The key not just to her chains but to her freedom, to her future, and to the justice she would claim. The chains around Sada's wrists and ankles were more than cold metal. They were symbols of oppression, reminders of how her own family had turned against her. Each link seemed to weigh down not just her body, but her spirit, pressing against her shoulders and bending her posture. At first, the physical pain dominated her mind. Every movement was a struggle, every attempt to shift position a reminder of her helplessness. Sleep came in short bursts, interrupted by the aches in her joints and the sting of bruised skin. Yet even in these moments of suffering, Sad refused to surrender entirely to despair. Isolation was perhaps the hardest part. The world outside her small, dark cell continued without her. She could hear the distant sounds of the village, the laughter of children, the clatter of pots, the rhythm of everyday life, all reminders of the freedom that had been wrenched away from her. The absence of companionship intensified her loneliness, making every whisper, every creak of the house, and every footstep feel amplified and threatening. But Sad learned to turn the isolation into a tool. Without distraction, she could focus entirely on understanding the patterns and behaviors of those who had imprisoned her. Every movement, every routine became a piece of information. Her captors' routines were surprisingly consistent. Malika would emerge from her room at the same hour each morning, checking the cell, speaking softly to the brothers, and leaving minor items in predictable places. Her brothers, eager to impress their mother, followed similar schedules, taking turns guarding her, fetching supplies, or performing errands. Each small variation became a potential opening, a tiny flaw in the wall of control that surrounded her. Saad began cataloging these moments mentally, noting the times when the chains were loosened slightly, when doors were left ajar, or when a key might rest too long in an unattended lock. The whispers she overheard were equally valuable. Even in moments of silence, Saad strained her ears to catch the low conversations of her captors. Malika muttered about her anxieties, the need to maintain dominance, the fear that Saad might outwit her one day. Her brothers argued in hushed tones about who should watch her, who might be too careless, or who feared her more than they admitted. Every syllable, every tone of voice became part of a larger picture, a map of weakness and opportunity. Saad began to notice patterns in their speech, moments of doubt, contradictions in orders, and flashes of insecurity. Each slip, no matter how small, suggested a potential path to freedom. Even as the chains dug into her skin, Sada's mind began to rise above the physical constraints. She learned patience in suffering, strategy in observation, and strength in endurance. Pain and humiliation no longer paralyzed her. Instead, they sharpened her senses, attuned her perception, and honed her resolve. She visualized every possibility for escape, every sequence of movements she could exploit, and every moment when her captors would underestimate her. By the end of the first week in chains, Saad had transformed the weight of captivity into a source of power. The metal around her wrists could bind her body, but it could not bind her intellect, her foresight, or her growing understanding of those who sought to control her. Each whispered word, each mistake by her captors, became a potential key, a clue that brought her closer to the freedom they believed was forever beyond her reach. In the quiet of her cell, Saad allowed herself one certainty. Though her wings were clipped and her movement constrained, her mind was free, and it would find the way to fly above them all. Sada's chains clinked softly as she shifted, her ears straining to catch every sound beyond the heavy wooden door. At first, the muffled whispers were nothing more than a tangle of indistinct murmurs, but over time she began to recognize patterns in tone, cadence, and emphasis. Every whispered phrase carried weight, a fragment of truth or a hint of deception, and Sada's keen mind worked tirelessly to piece them together. She quickly realized that the voices belonged to her stepmother, Malika, and her brothers, each revealing more about themselves than they intended. The first conversation she caught was laced with greed. Malika spoke in a low, urgent voice about a hidden cache of wealth, gold coins, rare beads, and ceremonial artifacts, tucked away somewhere in the house, away from prying eyes. Her brothers argued about how to divide it, each claiming entitlement while simultaneously fearing their mother's wrath. They did not know that their words, so carefully concealed in hushed tones, had already been heard. Sada's mind raced, mapping the locations mentioned, noting the behaviors that accompanied the discussions, and storing every detail in her memory. The whispers also revealed cowardice. Malika fretted over village rumors, fearing that the neighbors were beginning to suspect her duplicity. "If they discover the truth," she muttered one night, "everything we've built will crumble. All of it." Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the panic she hoped to hide behind her usual steely composure. The brothers, eager to maintain their mother's favor, tried to reassure her, but their own voices wavered, betraying doubts and insecurities. Saad realized that fear was a weapon she could understand and exploit. Those who tried to intimidate her were, in truth, frightened themselves. Even their hypocrisy surfaced in whispers. Malika spoke of piety and moral superiority, reminding the brothers of their duties to the ancestors and the village. "We are the guardians of our family's honor," she said one night, voice firm, though it trembled ever so slightly. Yet the words contradicted the plans they were plotting: theft, deceit, and imprisonment of the very girl who had brought no harm. Saad listened carefully, recognizing that those who spoke of virtue often hid the deepest vices. Secrets of the past emerged gradually. Her brothers confessed errors they had made, alliances they had formed in secret, and mistakes they had tried to erase from memory. Malika recalled bargains and promises broken, whispers of betrayals in the village, and moments where fear dictated cruelty. These confessions, spoken freely in the assumed privacy of night, painted a vivid picture of the family's corruption, their reliance on manipulation, and the fragility of the power they held over her. Saad also uncovered the motivation behind her imprisonment. Her stepmother and brothers feared her intelligence, her natural charisma, and her ability to see through their schemes. "She knows too much," Malika whispered one night, voice sharp with anger. "She notices what we do, remembers what she sees. We cannot allow her to move freely." The brothers nodded in agreement, unaware that Sada's mind was cataloging every phrase, every expression of fear and greed. Their words were their undoing, a roadmap to liberation carefully carved into the air by their own voices. Through nights of rain, wind, and darkness, Saad learned to listen beyond mere words. She observed how pauses, sighs, and hushed tones conveyed meaning, noting when fear, envy, or guilt penetrated the surface of their speech. A name dropped, a hesitation, or a muttered justification revealed more than a long lecture could. The chains that bound her physically could not prevent her from understanding the intricate web of deceit surrounding her. By piecing together these whispers, Saad gained insight into her family's habits, their routines, and the locations of their secret stashes. She understood the vulnerabilities in their plans, the points where their confidence faltered, and the tiny openings where a clever mind could find advantage. Each whisper built a mental map, a key to unlock her own freedom that the oppressors had unknowingly given her. In the quiet of the night, Saad allowed herself a subtle smile. Though bound by iron and deception, she was not powerless. The whispers behind the walls were no longer instruments of fear, they had become tools of strategy. Each secret, each confession, and each hidden truth offered her the knowledge she needed to turn the tables on those who sought to suppress her. The very chains meant to contain her could not contain her mind. And with every word she heard, every secret unveiled in hushed tones, Saad grew more certain that liberation was within reach, if only she had the patience and courage to act. By the end of weeks spent listening, cataloging, and learning, Saad had transformed the weight of captivity into a weapon. The whispers behind the walls revealed not just their crimes, but the essence of their fears and flaws. She understood that those who attempt to control others through cruelty leave behind the very keys to their own undoing. And with that realization, Sada's spirit soared above the chains, ready to seize the moment that would free her entirely. Saad shifted her weight slightly, the iron cuffs biting into her wrists as she strained to examine every detail of the small, dark room. Her eyes, though accustomed to low light, scanned the space meticulously. The walls, rough clay, bore faint scratches that told stories of previous occupants or perhaps her own family's impatience. Each mark became a clue, a potential indicator of hidden mechanisms or overlooked weaknesses. She noticed a floorboard that seemed slightly more worn than the others, its grain polished by frequent but careful movement, a subtle imperfection in an otherwise rigid pattern. Her fingers traced the edges of the floor, her touch tentative yet determined, cataloging every detail for later action. The lock that bound her also drew careful scrutiny. Though thick and heavy, it bore signs of wear, Tiny chips along the shackle and scratches around the keyhole suggested repeated attempts to force it open or perhaps the presence of a key long thought lost. Saad studied the way light fell across the metal, noting shadows that might conceal hidden pins or latch mechanisms. Each imperfection whispered possibilities to her trained mind, hinting at the chance that her captors had underestimated her attention to detail and persistence. Along the walls, she observed loose stones and faint cracks that seemed almost purposeful. Perhaps placed there intentionally as weak points, or perhaps simply neglected by her family. Sada's intuition told her that these were not random. In her village, clever constructions often carried secrets meant for the observant. A single nudge, a precise movement, could yield a hidden compartment or loosen the chain's hold. She gently prodded each suspicious stone, feeling for shifts or give, each subtle movement recorded in her memory for the moment she could act. Beyond the physical clues, Saad felt the weight of symbolic keys, those hidden in patterns, in behaviors, in routines of her captors. Her stepmother and brothers had been meticulous in their cruelty, but even they had habits. The cadence of footsteps, the pauses in their speech, the ways they jangled keys and chains, all were hints that could guide her. Saad realized that escape would not come from brute strength alone. It would require understanding, observation, and precise timing. Her mind began forming a mental map of possibilities, plotting the intersection of physical weaknesses and human behavior. She recalled the whispers she had overheard behind the walls, secrets spoken in hushed tones that revealed more than words alone. Certain phrases hinted at concealed compartments in the home, others suggested reliance on old locks and heirloom keys. "No one will ever find it," her stepmother had boasted once, voice trembling with false confidence. That very boast was a key in itself, confirmation that her captors assumed their secrecy was absolute. Saad understood that every statement of certainty could mask a vulnerability, every confident assertion could be the pathway to liberation. The physical act of planning became a mental ritual. Saad imagined each movement in slow motion, lifting the floorboard, loosening the stone, aligning the lock pins, and stepping free from the chains without alerting her stepmother or brothers. Her imagination filled in the gaps where the shadows obscured detail, testing the plausibility of each action. She considered contingencies, anticipating moments of failure, preparing alternatives, and refining her strategy. Each scenario strengthened her confidence, transforming despair into determination. Sada's awareness extended to the environment outside the room. She noted where the sunlight fell through small cracks in the roof, the sounds of footsteps on the courtyard stones, and even the rhythm of the wind rustling through nearby trees. Every natural and human movement became part of a synchronized map, guiding her toward the best moment to act. The chains that once symbolized oppression now became markers, their weight a reminder to proceed with care, timing, and precision. Over days and nights, her examination deepened. She experimented subtly, shifting the chains, tapping the floorboard, and listening for echoes. Tiny adjustments revealed small responses: a loose stone that wiggled slightly, a floorboard that hummed faintly when pressed, and a lock that shivered under gentle pressure. Each discovery confirmed her growing belief that a key, both literal and symbolic, existed. It was not just the iron key that could free her. It was understanding the combination of human error, environmental clues, and her own ingenuity. Patience became her ally. Saad recognized that rushing would nullify all the advantages she had painstakingly accumulated. She measured time by the patterns of her captors, by the intervals of their negligence, and by the rhythm of natural light. She learned that escape would be a delicate orchestration, the culmination of observation, intuition, and courage. The hidden key, in every sense of the word, was within her grasp if she could wait, watch, and act with unwavering focus. At last, Sada's confidence grew to certainty. She had uncovered the subtle markers, the imperfections in chains, walls, and floor, the behavioral patterns of those who sought to bind her. Each observation built on the last, creating a coherent understanding of her captivity. The hidden key was no longer a possibility but a reality waiting for her careful, deliberate hand. And as she lay in the dim light of her prison, Saad felt a spark of triumph, a knowledge that the chains around her wrists were not the end of her story, but merely the beginning of a path she was fully prepared to walk. Saad had learned to move carefully through the days of her captivity, her eyes always observing, her ears attuned to every sound, every nuance of her surroundings. It was during one such moment of quiet observation that she first noticed subtle acts that seemed insignificant to others but which spoke volumes to her trained senses. A basket of water left just slightly within reach, a piece of bread dropped near the door, a stray dog waiting quietly nearby. These were small gestures, perhaps unintentional, but to Saad they became threads she could weave into a web of support. She began to understand that even in the darkest circumstances, allies often exist where one least expects them. One morning, as the sun filtered through the cracks in her prison, Saad noticed a faint shadow moving along the edge of the compound. At first she thought it was a trick of the light, a fleeting play of shapes across the ground. But then the shadow repeated its movement, lingering long enough for her to recognize the figure of a villager, someone who had previously seemed indifferent or fearful of her stepmother's wrath. The villager's eyes met hers briefly, a glance filled with sympathy and recognition of her plight. It was a silent acknowledgement, an understanding that she was not entirely alone. That brief connection, small as it was, filled her with hope and reinforced her determination to find allies where she could. Even the animals of the village and forest seemed to respond to her presence. Birds perched on nearby roofs would chirp in sequences that seemed almost like a rhythm of warning or encouragement. A dog, thin and cautious, would linger just beyond the fence, watching her with intelligence in its eyes. Saad realized that these creatures, often dismissed as ordinary, were attentive observers of human behavior and could serve as guides or messengers in subtle ways. She began to note patterns, a bird's sudden flight indicating an approaching person, the dog's movement signaling a change in the environment. Each interaction, however small, became a component of a network she was mentally constructing. One day, a distant cousin of her stepmother, disillusioned with the family's cruelty, began leaving tiny scraps of food at the edge of her cell. They never came into direct contact, but Saad understood these gestures as deliberate, a careful means of communication that could be trusted. She responded in subtle ways, a knock against the floor, a slight movement of her chains, a look that conveyed acknowledgement. These interactions became the foundation for a clandestine network, a system of silent messages that would later prove invaluable in her escape. Saad learned to interpret every nuance, every pattern, transforming what seemed like ordinary acts of kindness into a roadmap of support. In observing her captors, she realized the importance of maintaining the illusion of submission. To appear defiant or overly clever would provoke immediate retaliation, possibly undoing any goodwill she had begun to cultivate among potential allies. So she adopted a careful balance, performing the tasks assigned, lowering her gaze when necessary, but never letting go of her internal awareness or her mental strategy. In this dual existence, outwardly compliant, inwardly calculating, Saad honed the skill of appearing powerless while quietly strengthening her position. The villagers, though wary of the stepmother's influence, had long memories and keen senses of justice. Some were hesitant to act openly, fearing punishment, but subtle gestures, a tool left within reach, a whisper from the marketplace, a glance of sympathy, allowed Saad to piece together a map of potential support. She began to memorize these interactions, noting who could be trusted with small tasks and who required continued observation. Each successful interpretation reinforced her confidence and expanded her understanding of the hidden network around her. Saad also discovered that small routines could be leveraged for communication. The regular passing of a well-known merchant, the timing of animal movements, or the daily patterns of the village offered opportunities to exchange messages or receive supplies unnoticed. She practiced discreet signaling, tapping chains in a rhythm that could be interpreted by the observant, positioning stones or small objects in locations to indicate needs or warnings. These methods required patience and precision, but they reinforced her sense of agency, allowing her to influence events subtly despite her physical confinement. Over time, Saad became adept at reading the intentions behind each action. A carefully left piece of cloth could signal that a guard was distracted. A stone placed in a particular pattern indicated a safe moment to move. Even the smallest actions, a bird's sudden call, a dog's shift in posture, were interpreted as part of a broader system of guidance and support. Her mental map expanded with every observation, connecting the natural world, her human allies, and her own strategic thinking into a coherent framework for eventual liberation. By the end of many weeks, Saad had cultivated a network of hidden allies, sympathetic villagers, attentive animals, and even one or two family members secretly opposed to her stepmother's cruelty. Each ally, each observation, and each silent communication reinforced her growing sense of power. Though the chains remained around her wrists, she no longer felt entirely imprisoned. The network she had built, though invisible to her captors, became her strength, a reminder that resilience is often nurtured in shadows, and that allies can exist even in the most oppressive circumstances. Saad quickly realized that patience was not merely a virtue in her situation, it was a necessary tool for survival. Days blended into nights as the chains around her wrists weighed heavily, reminding her of her confinement and the cruelty of her stepmother and brothers. Yet, within this weight, she discovered lessons that could not be taught by books or village elders. Each hour, each repetition of their routines revealed patterns, weaknesses, and opportunities that would otherwise remain hidden. The test of patience became both a challenge and a training ground for her mind and spirit. Hunger and thirst were constant companions, gnawing at her body, but Saad learned to focus beyond immediate discomfort. She noted the times when food was brought, the manner in which it was delivered, and the moments when her captors were distracted. She observed how the guards interacted with one another, the subtle gestures of complicity or irritation, and the shifts in tone when secrets were mentioned. These small details, initially lost in her suffering, became vital pieces of information she filed away for future use. Her body suffered, but her mind sharpened. The endurance of the physical pain reinforced the patience required to act wisely when the opportunity arose. Repeated humiliation was another test of her character. Her stepmother would parade her before visitors, calling her unworthy, mocking her intelligence and highlighting her supposed failings. Her brothers would laugh, adding threats or false accusations that left her momentarily shaken. But Saad resisted the instinct to respond with anger or fear. Instead, she observed the reactions of everyone around her, measuring how much each insult affected them, and noting inconsistencies in their behavior. She realized that the more she endured silently, the more she understood the inner workings of their schemes. Patience was her shield, her way of turning cruelty into insight. The slow passing of time forced Saad to consider every small action carefully. Each moment had to be measured. A misplaced glance, an audible breath, or a rash movement could alert her captors to her intentions. She began to create mental maps of the household, noting where items were stored, how the doors and windows functioned, and the flow of human traffic. She observed when the stepmother was preoccupied with visitors, when her brother's attention wavered, and when the villagers walked near enough to notice subtle signs. The endurance required for these observations was immense, but Saad understood that patience amplified the value of knowledge. Information gained without haste was powerful, precise, and actionable. Time also became a teacher of human nature. Saad watched as fear, greed, and pride influenced behavior. The stepmother's overconfidence in her control created patterns of predictability. Her brother's arrogance often led to mistakes and oversights. Even the villagers, wary of confrontation, revealed their loyalties and fears through subtle actions and indirect communication. By waiting and observing, Saad began to see the invisible threads connecting people's intentions to their behavior. Patience allowed her to see beyond immediate appearances and uncover the deeper truths that would later guide her escape and reclaim her power. Saad found that endurance extended to the mind and spirit as much as the body. She endured boredom, isolation, and the mental strain of confinement, cultivating a sense of focus and clarity. Meditation, reflection, and silent practice became her companions. She rehearsed possible escape scenarios in her mind, calculated the timing of actions, and anticipated the reactions of her captors. Each passing day became a rehearsal stage, each repetition refining her strategy and reinforcing her resilience. Patience, she realized, was not passive, it was active preparation for a future she intended to shape. The test of patience also deepened her connection with her allies, even if their support was subtle. Stray animals that lingered near her chains, villagers who left unnoticed hints or food, and the one disillusioned family member who secretly watched, all required Saad to wait, observe, and interpret their intentions correctly. Acting too quickly or too boldly could have jeopardized these fragile relationships. By exercising patience, she ensured that every ally was reliable, every signal understood, and every interaction strategically advantageous. Patience became both a protective measure and a means to build the network that would later assist her freedom. Nature itself became a silent instructor in patience. The changing skies, the rhythm of the wind, and the occasional passing of rainstorms taught Saad to wait for the right moment, to sense when the environment favored action. A fleeting shadow, a soft gust of wind, or the timing of a storm could provide both cover and opportunity. Observing these patterns required her to suspend immediate desire for escape or revenge, teaching her that precise timing was as important as strength or cleverness. Endurance and patience transformed her suffering into a training ground for strategic thinking. By the end of many cycles of captivity, Saad had internalized patience as a profound strength. Her body was still bound, but her mind was free, alert, and ready. She could predict movements, anticipate mistakes, and recognize the subtle cues that would allow her to act decisively when the moment came. The chains that once symbolized her powerlessness now highlighted the magnitude of her endurance. Each day of waiting, observing, and learning had prepared her to convert oppression into opportunity, weakness into cunning, and delay into victory. She realized that the perfect opportunity would not appear immediately, but when it did, she would be fully prepared, her patience sharpened into an instrument of liberation. Saad understood, finally, that the test of patience was not merely about enduring suffering. It was about mastering it, transforming adversity into strategy, and turning time into an ally. Every humiliation, every insult, every hour spent in chains had been a lesson in timing, observation, and self-discipline. She was no longer the girl who had been thrown into captivity. She was a strategist, a patient observer, and a mind capable of seeing the hidden paths that others overlooked. And with this preparation, the moment of her liberation, when it came, would be unstoppable. Sada's eyes had grown accustomed to the dim light of her cell, her senses sharpened by weeks of confinement and observation. Every crack in the wall, every worn board in the floor, and every unusual object in the room had become part of her mental map of the prison. One afternoon, as she traced her fingers along the edges of the stone floor, she noticed a faint groove beneath a loose tile, subtle enough to be overlooked by anyone else. Curiosity piqued, she gently pried the tile aside and discovered a small, intricately carved object. A key, though unlike any she had seen. It was not merely a piece of metal but a combination of craftsmanship and symbolic markings, almost as if it had been designed with thought and purpose beyond simple locks. Saad realized immediately that this key was not meant to be found by accident. Its presence suggested the foresight of someone who knew the dangers she might face, an ancestor, a wise relative, or even a moment of negligence by her captors that had left a path open. Her mind raced with possibilities. This key could unlock her chains, reveal a hidden door, or provide access to an escape route. But she understood instinctively that it was not a tool for brute force. It required understanding, observation, and intelligence to use it correctly. The key was as much a test of her mind as a means to her freedom. Her first step was to study the markings. Patterns etched into its surface seemed to correspond with subtle symbols she had noticed around the house. Scratches on the wooden beams, faint carvings in the walls, and even natural elements like the arrangement of stones near the edge of the courtyard. Each connection hinted at a code, a sequence of actions that needed to be followed. Saad realized that her escape was not simply a matter of unlocking her chains, it required timing, precision, and careful planning. A misstep could alert her stepmother and brothers or trigger unforeseen consequences. In addition to the physical key, Saad recognized that her mental key, the knowledge she had accumulated during her patience and observation, was equally important. Every whispered conversation, every mistake she had noted, and every pattern she had studied became a piece of the puzzle. The key and her intellect formed a partnership. One provided access, the other ensured success. Without her understanding of human behavior, timing, and strategy, the key alone would be insufficient. Her preparation and insight made the tool powerful. Saad also considered the moral implications of the key. She did not seek vengeance for its own sake but liberation and justice. The key was a means to reclaim her agency, expose deceit, and protect others who might suffer under her stepmother's tyranny. She committed to using it wisely, blending courage with intelligence, and ensuring that her actions would be guided by purpose rather than impulse. The discovery filled her with a renewed sense of hope and determination. Clutching the key, Saad felt a surge of empowerment. The chains that had bound her for so long now seemed less oppressive, their weight diminished by the possibilities the key represented. She knew that action was coming soon, but for now, the discovery itself was a victory, a symbol that patience, observation, and careful thought could turn even the smallest object into a powerful instrument of freedom. The true key was not just the one in her hands. It was the combination of her courage, intellect, and resilience, ready to unlock the path to liberation. Saad sat in the dim glow of the evening, the key clutched tightly in her hand, her mind alive with calculations and possibilities. She knew that simply unlocking the chains would not guarantee her freedom. The stepmother and her brothers were cunning, and their cruelty ran deep. Every plan had to account for the intricacies of their routines, the villagers' possible reactions, and the hidden allies who had quietly observed their schemes alongside her. Each element was a piece of a larger puzzle, and one misstep could mean recapture or worse. Her first observation focused on the household. She had spent countless days noting the stepmother's habits, the time she retired to her chambers, the moments when she grew distracted by gossip or trivial affairs, and the subtle signals she gave to her sons when expecting obedience. Saad also knew the brothers' predictable patterns. when they bragged about their control, when they prowled the grounds, and the exact manner in which they checked on her chains. These details, once recorded in her mind, formed a rhythm, a series of gaps and openings that could be exploited. Next, Saad considered the village itself. Though the household was her immediate obstacle, the surrounding village could either hinder or aid her. She had discreetly noted villagers who were sympathetic, those who had shown small kindnesses, left water near her cell, or whispered warnings. These allies would be crucial. They could provide diversions, guidance, or even tools when the moment arrived. Trust, she realized, had to be earned carefully. Revealing her plan too early could jeopardize the entire effort. She mentally mapped their positions and potential contributions, ensuring that each movement she made could be supported when needed. The key itself demanded strategic use. It was not simply a device for unlocking physical chains. It was a symbol of timing, observation, and understanding. Saad visualized every action, sliding the key into the lock at the precise moment, turning it in a way that would avoid creaking, and retreating into shadows unseen. She imagined the stepmother discovering the chains empty only after Saad had vanished into the protective cover of the nearby forest. The key was a tool, but the intelligence behind its use, patience, planning, and foresight, was what would ensure success. Finally, Saad considered the aftermath. Her plan was not only to reclaim her freedom but also to expose the stepmother and brother's wrongdoings. She would collect evidence silently, witness the patterns of their deceit, and reveal the truth to the villagers in a way that would leave no room for doubt. The goal was justice, not vengeance, and this clarity kept her focused. Every movement, every decision, and every pause had to align with both escape and accountability. With a plan formed, Saad felt a mixture of anticipation and resolve. The chains were heavy, but the path to freedom was clearer than ever. Every calculation, every observation, and every ally contributed to a strategy that was as precise as it was bold. The night would be her canvas, her intellect the brush, and her courage the color that would paint her liberation. In that moment, Saad understood that freedom was not merely the absence of physical restraint, it was the careful orchestration of knowledge, patience, and the quiet determination to rise above those who sought to hold her down. Saad returned to the village at first light, her movements deliberate and confident, carrying with her not only the freedom she had fought to reclaim but also the evidence that would expose the cruelty and deceit of her stepmother and brothers. The villagers, still shrouded in early morning mist, watched from hidden corners as she approached the household that had imprisoned her. Word of her escape had begun to ripple quietly, carried by those few allies who had assisted her in secret, creating a tense anticipation that lingered in the air. Inside the house, the stepmother and brothers were oblivious to her presence at first, wrapped in the false security that comes from underestimating one's victim. Saad entered boldly, her eyes calm but filled with purpose. The weight of the chains she had endured replaced now with the strength of knowledge and strategy. She placed the evidence she had meticulously gathered, scraps of documents, accounts of secret dealings, and testimonies of complicit villagers, on the table where all could see. Each piece told a story of greed, fear, and cruelty, weaving together a tapestry of wrongdoing that no one could ignore. The stepmother's face twisted with disbelief, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. She tried to summon words of threat, to intimidate, to reassert the power she thought she held, but Saad remained unshaken. Every tactic, every gesture of fear or control that her stepmother used had been anticipated, studied, and countered. Saad spoke calmly but firmly, recounting the actions that had confined her, the lies spread through the village, and the ways they had sought to undermine not only her but the integrity of the community. Her brothers, once towering figures in her life of oppression, now seemed small and powerless before the quiet strength radiating from Saad. Their attempts at aggression faltered as the villagers, drawn by curiosity and the whispers of Saada's escape, began to gather outside and inside the house. They witnessed her composure, the clarity of her words, and the undeniable proof of the family's misdeeds. The power dynamics that had once favored the oppressors were reversed. The chains that had been meant to silence her now symbolized the strength and cunning she had cultivated while in captivity. As Saad laid out the evidence and recounted her experiences, the stepmother and brothers grew increasingly flustered, realizing that their carefully constructed facade had been shattered. Saad did not raise her voice, nor did she strike fear with threats. Her courage and intelligence, honed under the pressure of chains and isolation, were weapon enough. Each revelation brought murmurs of shock from the villagers, whispers of justice and recognition that the oppressed had found her voice. Finally, Saad stepped back, allowing the weight of truth to settle. The oppressors, stripped of their authority and exposed to the judgment of the community, could do nothing but cower. The villagers, now fully aware of the manipulation and cruelty they had unwittingly tolerated, began to take steps to restore fairness and protect Saad from future harm. What had started as captivity had transformed into empowerment. Saada's confrontation was not only personal vindication but also a communal reckoning, proving that courage, patience, and strategic thinking can overcome even the most oppressive chains. With her chains removed and her captors exposed, Saad turned her attention to rebuilding the life that had been disrupted for so long. She entered her home, a place once shadowed by fear and cruelty, and began restoring it both physically and symbolically. Walls were repaired, rooms cleaned, and neglected spaces brought back to life, reflecting the renewal she felt within herself. Each action was deliberate, a reclaiming not only of property but of dignity, signaling to the villagers that justice had been restored and that oppression no longer held sway. Saad then addressed the practical aspects of her family's misdeeds. She ensured that her stepmother and brothers were held accountable for their actions, presenting the evidence she had meticulously gathered. Through dialogue with the elders, fair judgment was rendered, and restitution was made where possible. The villagers witnessed these measures, understanding that justice was not born of vengeance, but of clarity, courage, and thoughtful intervention. Saada's actions taught them that those who abuse power cannot escape accountability when truth is illuminated. Beyond restoring her home, Saad devoted herself to guiding the community. She offered counsel to those struggling under injustice, advised families on resolving disputes fairly, and trained children to observe, question, and think critically rather than follow blindly. Her experiences had shown her the importance of resilience, patience, and strategic thinking, and she shared these lessons openly. Villagers came to see her as both protector and mentor, someone whose wisdom had been forged in hardship yet refined by justice. The symbolic removal of chains extended beyond Saad herself. The village's understanding of fairness and accountability shifted profoundly. Where fear and silence had once allowed cruelty to thrive, there now grew a culture of vigilance and courage. People recognized that oppressive behaviors could be challenged and that even the most entrenched injustice could be overturned when one acted with intelligence and integrity. Saada's story became a cornerstone of communal values, reinforcing that freedom requires both awareness and action. In her personal life, Saad reclaimed the joys that had been denied to her. She walked openly through the village, free from the scrutiny and malice that had constrained her. Her relationships, once tense and cautious, gradually healed as truth and justice rebalanced the dynamics between her and the villagers. The chains that had once bound her were gone, replaced by respect, acknowledgement, and trust. By the time the seasons changed, Saada's home and heart were fully restored. She had transformed her suffering into guidance, her oppression into empowerment. The village, too, had learned to lift the invisible chains of fear, ignorance, and complacency, embracing a culture of fairness and courage. In every household, in every gathering, Saada's name became synonymous with resilience, justice, and wisdom, a lasting testament to the power of one individual to inspire liberation in a community. Years passed, and Saada's story gradually wove itself into the fabric of the village's memory. Children grew up hearing the tale of the girl who had been chained and oppressed, yet had discovered the key that others believed lost forever. Mothers would gather their daughters under the shade of trees, recounting Saada's courage and cleverness, emphasizing the wisdom she displayed in observing her surroundings and the patience she showed in waiting for the right moment to act. Each retelling reinforced the values of resilience, intelligence, and moral strength, shaping the way the young girls saw themselves and the world around them. The key Saad had discovered became a powerful symbol, one not of metal or wood, but of insight, resourcefulness, and courage. Villagers spoke of it in hushed admiration, as a reminder that liberation was not always physical. Sometimes the greatest chains were those of fear, ignorance, and silence, and the keys to undoing them were hidden in plain sight, waiting for keen eyes and brave hearts to find them. Saada's example taught that even in circumstances that seemed hopeless, observation, patience, and quiet planning could uncover solutions that others could never imagine. Stories spread beyond the village, carried by travelers and wandering storytellers. Saada's tale became a parable across the region. The girl in chains who did not despair, who did not curse her fate, but instead learned, listened, and acted with courage when the time was right. Parents in neighboring communities would tell their children of her bravery, illustrating that oppression is never permanent, and that intelligence and determination can overturn even the most cunning schemes. The key she found became a metaphor for all hidden strengths within oneself: patience, cunning, resilience, and unwavering moral courage. Saad herself continued to live as a figure of guidance and inspiration. She trained others in observation and discernment, encouraging young people to notice the subtleties around them, to understand people and situations fully before reacting. Her teachings emphasized that strength without wisdom is easily broken, but wisdom paired with courage can unlock doors that seem forever closed. Villagers learned not to underestimate quiet observation, small acts of patience, and the accumulation of knowledge, all lessons Saad had mastered while chained and enduring hardship. Even the physical place where Saad had been held captive became a site of memory and teaching. The old chains were preserved as a reminder, not of suffering but of triumph over cruelty and injustice. Young girls were brought there to understand the meaning of vigilance, resilience, and the power of clever thinking. They learned that no matter how strong the chains imposed by others may seem, the right key, whether literal or symbolic, could always be found by those willing to see, listen, and act. Sada's legacy endured not only through the stories and lessons but in the way the villagers began to treat one another. Fear and suspicion gradually gave way to fairness and respect. The knowledge that intelligence, patience, and careful observation could overcome even the most deliberate attempts to oppress others changed the culture of the village. Sada's courage became the standard against which integrity and bravery were measured. Through generations, her tale reminded everyone that oppression is never absolute, and that the keys to freedom, courage, wisdom, and resilience often lie hidden in the places where others fail to look. Sada's story became timeless, a testament to the idea that one person's insight and determination can unlock chains, transform lives, and create a lasting legacy.